I want to welcome everyone who's watching us now or who will be watching us later in the day or the coming few weeks. This is the second of our roundtables. It's run by the GLD program in Gothenburg University and APS, Alternative Policy Solutions, at the American University in Cairo. We have the pleasure to have a consortium of colleagues from the region, all of which have an amazing track record in working on issues of climate change. We have colleagues from the AUB, Dr. Nadim Farajalla. We have Dr. Khalifa Al-Zeidi from Oman. We have Dr. Mohamed Salih from Khartoum, and we have Dr. Eyad Yaqob from Palestine. Also, Ghadir Hussein and Thabit Yaqob are with us from GLD. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. This is, as I said, the second of a series of roundtables on climate change. Our first discussed land and adaptation. The second will be today, and we will be discussing climate justice and equity, and we'll be having a third later in the month, end of September. We will also have all the announcements for this coming your way. If you're interested, of course, join our handlers and follow us, whether it's GLD or APS. You will find more information in both languages, English and Arabic, on both social media platforms. Welcome, everyone, and I would leave the platform now to my colleague, Thabit Yaqob, who will be moderating the discussion for today. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Rabab, and welcome, everyone. So just a quick recap, as Rabab has mentioned, we had the first roundtable in July, and it was about climate change and adaptation in the MENA, where we very much focused on local adaptation actions in the region. And we have prepared a policy brief based on that discussion. It should be out in the coming days. Our communication team are finalizing that. It should be out in a couple of days. And of course, the final roundtable will be at the end of the month. The theme is not figured out yet. We will share information in due course as well. As Rabab said, you know, it's a partnership, and I just want to give a shout out to people like Rose, who is not here, but she's been doing a lot of work on the background, Gadia and Jeff. I can see Jeff is here, and others, and all the partners. So the theme of today's roundtable is about equity and climate change. And before we get started, and before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say a few words about the theme. I think equity and fairness issues have become very important in recent years. Some of you must have heard words like climate justice or just transition. Those, you know, they've kind of become buzzwords in recent years. And I think, you know, you'll be hearing a lot about equity and justice and fairness in Egypt later this year during the COP, and also at the other COP next year in Qatar, in UAE rather. I think there's a kind of a growing consensus that, you know, to fight climate change, we have to confront issues of equity. We have to acknowledge that, you know, climate change does impact people differently. And I'm particularly very interested because some of the questions in this field are very normative. I think, you know, as you probably know, that climate research is dominated mostly sometimes by scientists who don't want to ask normative questions. And I think here we have the chance to ask those very controversial and very normative questions about, you know, who is responsible for climate change, who is impacted, who has the resources to cope, who gets to be invited to discuss, who is not invited. Question of representation, which as I say in the first roundtable, I think is an area we have to do better, because we're not very equally represented in today's roundtable. It's more of what people call a manel. We can get better at this. So we're joined by 5 panelists, as it was in the previous roundtable. Dr. Yahya Guma from the University of Khartoum, and Dr. Mohamed Salih from the same university. Dr. Nadim Farajalla from the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. Khalifa Zaid from the Sultan Qaboos University in Oman, and Dr. Eyad Yaqob from the American University of Palestine. For those who were here in the first roundtable, I gave a long intro, so I don't want to go into those today. So to kind of get us started, I want the panelists to kind of give us, paint a picture, if you like, because as I've said, issues of equity and justice they have not really gone mainstream yet. These are issues that people are still grappling with. So I just want to get a sense of how are these issues really featuring in the Middle East and North African region. Are there any discussions around issues of equity and justice and climate change in your respective countries? So we just want to get kind of a broader picture before we get into the more detailed questions, more discussions on that. So if we would start with Oman, and then we'll keep the ball rolling to the rest.
Actually, in my country, there is no formal discussion regarding this kind of issue. Maybe this issue still is new for us, and there is no you cannot see there is something clear about the marginalization, even for people or for women. But actually, sometime you can read in the social media, or you can read some article regarding these things, about maybe people can get something beside there is other they cannot get something, especially when the extreme weather climate event happen in Oman. But some discussion regarding this kind of issue happen sometime in the universities, and maybe when you can sit with some doctor who concern about that things. But actually there is no things you can find it in a formal like discussion on this kind of issue. So the climate justice is still not clear in our country. Maybe in the soon future there is some research or some people take care about this kind of issue.
Yes. If we can go to Lebanon next and get a picture out there in Lebanon, what is the situation like?
Yes, thank you, Thabit. Hello, everyone. Well, environmental justice to some extent has been or has been integrated into the judiciary in Lebanon. The different governorates, so they're sub-regional entities like states in the US, but not with the same autonomy, have now their own environmental judge, environmental judiciary that follows certain rules. The level of implementation varies between one country or another. So in the environmental sense, there has been awareness, there has been implementation at the government level. On the people level, we all realize that oftentimes the poverty belts that ring around cities, or that where people of limited income find themselves living in high-risk areas, high-risk flooding, or areas that are prone to landslides or whatever. There is that lack of social justice that translates into an environmental justice once an environmental disaster happens. If a flood occurs, the poor are oftentimes the first to get hurt. Urban flooding, for example, in poor areas, the drainage, urban drainage is not good enough. So you get that. If we take this now level and take it up to a higher level with at the climate level, the relationship between climate impacts such as droughts or floods, etc., are not directly wired into the environmental justice realm. However, the government also is in the climate negotiations aspect have been working with other countries at the COPs. We're looking at loss and damage and how that can be factored in to help countries that have very limited contribution to greenhouse gas emission, how they can be compensated for damages that result from climate impacts, climate change impacts. So at that level, there is this consciousness, this knowledge. The implementation still remains rather feeble at times. So I'll stop here and turn it back over to you, Mohamed. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Nadim. That's a good picture from Lebanon. If we go to Sudan next.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we have first to try to give a definition for climate justice itself, because in most of the definition, it tries to link the human right and development to achieve human-centered approach and safeguarding the right of the most vulnerable areas and shared burden and benefit of climate change and its impact equitably and fair. So I think the entry point for this discussion, it should be come out with who caused the climate change, that we are really in the region and Sudan in specific, we are seriously affected by that climate change. So here's the climate justice discussed in the country in two from the two perspectives. The first one is the international one, that we think that the countries that they are contributing for causing of climate change, they have the responsibility, and they must help or provide support for our countries so that we can adapt or mitigate the climate impact in our country. This is the first one. I think this in the most of the countries of the region, there is some discussion about this as a sort of compensation for damage that happen in the countries. The second one is internal perspective, that in the country itself, there is always talk about marginalization and centralization. That's the maybe, as you know, the country Sudan in the most cases is governed by central government. So there is always talk about marginalization in the country. That the areas and state away from the center, they are suffering from less development. And this, of course, at the political issue, make a very aggressive political intention in the country and make some political instabilities. And one of the causes of less development in these countries or conflict itself is the deterioration and degradation of natural resources as a result of climate change. So they always talk and looking for equity and justice. And here, of course, it is not a philosophical issue. It is going to more in the country, in our country, in special, it goes to a sort of compensation, material compensation, that even internally, in most of the peace agreements, there is some sort of payment of the central government to the marginal areas, money and support in form of cash or in kind. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Dr. Mohamed. And let's get the final picture from Palestine from Dr. Eyad.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Ghadir, I just want to tell you, I sent you my memo. And I mentioned in my memo about the status of the climate justice in Palestine. As I heard from my colleagues from Arab countries, as I see, we are in the first steps in these issues. But I think before I heard from them, Palestine, they not did anything about this issue. I don't know, Yaqob, do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think we not did anything, but after I heard from my colleagues from other countries, I think we have something about this issue. I am late because Ghadir, I try to collect how many information about this issue in Palestine. So I contact Minister of Environment and other NGOs about policies and strategies. Minister of Environment, they're working in this issue and they signed the agreement with the UN about climate justice, as I heard from them. In the ground, there is many initiatives from the NGOs. And they implement many proposals for the donors about this issue. But we have one project in the ground. I mentioned in my memo, this project, the overall objective of this project to contribute to improving environmental and the climate justice in Palestine. The goal of the program is that by 2024, civil society organization and rights holders will have the capacity to address and challenge structural barriers to environmental and the climate justice in Palestine. This project have three objectives. The first objective is the main component of the project is capacity development, advocacy and society accountability, the resilience of society through innovative and smart approaches. This project is funded by Sweden, government of Sweden, and it will be finished at 2024. So we have some initiative, and as I heard from the NGO union, they have submitted many projects to the donors about this issue. Yaqob.
Thank you, Dr. Eyad. We'll get back to those as we proceed. I just want to pick up on the issue that has come out from this first round, the issue of compensation, that, you know, this idea that some countries are kind of more responsible to climate change than others. And we know that the region, the Middle East and North African region, is very diverse in many ways. There are countries that are very rich. There are countries that are rich in fossil fuel resources. They're oil producers, they're non-oil producers. So I don't know, the discussions about compensating countries that have done very little to cause climate change. Are these discussions within the regions? Or are these within the, you know, the kind of the broader UNFCCC framework? If people have any thoughts on that, I'm very keen to hear these discussions about compensation. Who is compensating who, and, you know, what sort of compensations? Are these financial? And, you know, as I've said, are these within the kind of regional initiative or kind of broader within the international UNFCCC framework? If anyone want to jump on that, Ali, if I can see you want to jump on that straight. Yeah.
Yes, actually, some say that the country who produce the oil, they have to pay more to protect the environment. But actually, protect an environment, it's responsibility for all the country, even that's produce oil or non-produce oil. This issue is actually linked more with the industrial area. That's we know the Western country maybe get more share or more part on these things. So I think it's not this issue is not just linked with the protect or produce oil or not. It's international issue, and I think everyone and every country has take care about this issue.
Okay, we'll go to Dr. Mohamed next. I can see you have your hands up. Dr. Mohamed, you have your...
Yeah, yes, I think.
Yes, go ahead. Oh, I think you're muted now. Have we lost him now? Oh no. Looks like we have lost him. Oh gosh. No.
He's back.
He's back, yeah. Dr. Mohamed, you can hear us. I think he's muted. Yeah, he is. Yes, he is back.
Of course, based on Paris Agreement and also Kyoto Protocol, it is a source of conflict between South and North.
Dr. Mohamed, if you can start all over again, we kind of missed you in a couple of minutes. If you can start afresh.
Yeah. Okay, I think that the issue of compensation, although it is very serious and it is very important, but you know, this issue is not only political issue, it is also a financial issue. So we know that the North countries, the industrial countries, they are responsible of causing climate change. But of course, they are not having the will to be responsible for compensation. So maybe most of you, they notice that this principle in Paris and Kyoto Protocol that that's the climate change, the principle that the climate change is common with differentiated responsibilities. So they try to introduce this principle so that, yes, we are agree that the climate change is global problem, but the responsibility and even the capability of the people of countries is are different. But this somehow it is going to be like a principle or a concept by which people they can cooperate with each other, but without any legal binding, so that they can compensate. And even with you know that in article in Paris Agreement that related with the loss and damage, because of course there is loss and damage caused by climate change, but there is no one there or willing to take the responsibility of compensation. So by way or another, we know that to compensate the losses and damage caused by climate change is need a huge money. So the countries, the industrial countries, most of them, they are trying to find ways to support without any concrete legal binding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. Before we go to Nadim and Eyad, you know, like I said, you know, I'm kind of interested if there's anything around the Arab League, for instance, kind of like a regional initiative, you know, apart from the broader North and South discussion. But if there's nothing, it's totally okay. Nadim, you go next. You're muted still. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks. Look, at the level of the Arab League, we're getting into climate politics here rather than climate justice.
It's just totally unavoidable, isn't
it? Yes. At the level of the Arab League, the way the Arab League tries to take a unified stance. But within the Arab League, there are the OPEC and the oil-producing countries and the non-oil-producing countries. And the unfairly, I wouldn't say really unfairly, putting the onus on the oil-producing countries to pay more is in many ways unfair, in the sense that they have been producing oil for the past, 6-7 decades, to meet the demands by industrialized countries who are carbon hungry. So when these countries are penalized either through a carbon tax in the industrialized countries that would reflect negatively on the oil-producing countries' economies, there is an unfairness there. Another unfairness is where these oil-producing countries themselves are powerful enough within the League of Arab States to take the lead in the negotiations and taking the non-oil producing Arab countries into positions that are not necessarily suitable for them. So these countries are caught in a bind, the non-oil producing countries. We cannot dissociate ourselves from the League of Arab States position, especially that many of these countries are reliant on aid and support from the oil producers. Yet we need to have more support in enabling us to adapt. I mean, by us, like Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Tunisia, Sudan to some extent before the division, you know, all of these countries are really going to suffer from climate change with no financial compensation in terms of selling oil and making money, or support from the more industrialized countries. So there is this unfairness in the politics of things, and there has to be a mutually supportive position, not only within the League of Arab States. What the Paris Agreement tried to do was create a platform where people, countries voluntarily came in, rather than like the Kyoto Protocol, which forced people to join, countries to join. That's why the Kyoto sort of failed. And the Paris Agreement sort of succeeded, but not yet. So that kind of mutual willingness and understanding that we are all going to suffer. There are people that should be held accountable, countries that should be held accountable, and they have to pay up for their activities and for the gains that they have garnered over the years. And this would then put them in a position to support the lesser developed countries. I will stop here and then take on later if there's need. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that we're getting into the politics, which can really be fascinating. But let's move on. Eyad, you want to say something on this as well?
Yes, but please, as you see me, I try to hear you well, but I have difficult to hear you. Can you repeat the question again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
No, the question I was saying is that, you know, the point about compensation, that, you know, some countries have caused climate change more than others. So some countries should be more responsible in kind of compensating those which have caused climate change the least.
Yes.
So I was asking your colleagues if there are any discussions within the Arab states or also within the broader international framework.
Thank you, Yaqob. Yes, about this issue, as you know, Yaqob, we have 3 pillars in the world talking about the climate change. You know, America and these countries, they are the main polluter in the world about the CO2, and Europe, and in the same time, the third countries, they're talking about society and this issue. About Arab countries and Middle East and Africa, I think before to talk, we're talking about how much competition about this issue, we need to know how much we are share in this pollution. I think we don't have figures until now. Maybe we have some figures from the World Bank and UN, but we don't have accurately how much we are share in this pollution and how much we are affected by this issue. As you know, most of our countries, they are not industrial countries, and we not contribute a lot in this issue. And in the same time, today, I give you an example. Today, I just looking, I have a presentation from my student about the climate change in some areas in Palestine. And I am surprising from how much we have a shrinkage in the agricultural areas. We have around 2% is going down every 10 years in the agriculture because of the temperature and all these things. So I think we need to to work first, to do some desk work, how much we are affected from this issue, to let the world take his responsibility about this weak countries, about these countries they don't have any issue to have adaptation or to have resilience about this problem.
Thank you, Eyad.
Thank you.
I think this is fascinating. Maybe we can have a whole different roundtable just on the politics of compensation and the politics of responsibility and non-responsibility. So let's switch on to something else, and I'm particularly interested on this other question of representation. Whose voice count? Who sits at the decision-making table? I think there's been a lot of concerns about. And here I'm talking about discussion at the national and sub-national. Yeah, sorry about the technical glitches. No, so I hope you. So I was talking about the question of representation and issues around decision making and the voices, which voices count, because there are stories about some groups tend to be marginalized, and I gave example of women and youth and minorities and the indigenous populations. So I just want to hear your thoughts in your respective countries if there is kind of concerns about the politics of decision making and who is excluded and who is included, whose voice counts, and so on. Let's start with Sudan. Is somebody has raised his hand somewhere?
I think that you hear me. I'm here.
We can hear you very well.
I think that most of the voices. Hello.
Hi, Dr. Mohamed. We can hear you very well.
Okay. I think that in Sudan, most of the voices came from especially from the marginal areas who are really suffering from the climate change, especially in rural areas. So, and even this, unfortunately, this, if not only voices, it will even start some conflicts and even start to be armed conflict. Of course, it is not directly to climate change, but as a result of deterioration and degradation of natural resources there. This became a source of and a reason for conflict. Most of you may heard about Darfur conflict, for example. According to many authors and according to governmental issues, to governmental voices, that the causes behind the problem is conflict on natural resources between nomads and agriculturists, pastoralists, and farmers. So this one and this voice is very strong and very loud in the country, that they looking actually for sort of solution, for sort of justice, and even for, as I mentioned before, for financial compensation in form of kind and money. The second one, I think that the youth nowadays, the youth looking for better condition for themselves, and also they looking for solution of problems that created as a result of climate change. Maybe this is from my point of view. Of course, we missed today Yahya. Maybe he have another additional opinion. But from my point of view, that the people in the rural areas and the youth, those are the loudest voices in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. Like I said, these are very normative questions, and some of them might be a bit controversial, but I think I'm kind of pushing you to say a bit more. And like I said in the beginning, we are not doing so well in terms of representation. I mean, we should have women on the panels, but that's something for next time. Let's go to Nadim.
Yes, in terms of voices heard, how is my question? Is it through parliamentary work, or is it through civil society, through the news, social media? What do you mean, if I may ask?
No, there's this concern that there are a lot of discussions around climate. Some of them are formal, like you said. My question is not really interested in the kind of like the formal national discussions along those bigger institutions like the parliament. I'm looking at just broader societal discussions. So civil society will be one of those, for instance.
You see, this is where you keep going into gray areas, at least in my opinion, that touch on both issues. A lot of the work that civil society does is to shed light basically on some issues or some vulnerable groups that are unable to get their rights, get to their rights, or to what is legally theirs. In Lebanon, since forever, but more recently, since 2010 or 2011, when the war in Syria started, and we had this deluge of Syrians fleeing Syria and residing in neighboring countries, Lebanon got an influx of basically 1 in every 4 or 1 in every 3 people at some point in Lebanon, residing in Lebanon, were Syrians. And the births in hospitals, in Lebanese hospitals, were 50% Syrian and 50% other nationalities, Lebanese and others that are residing in Lebanon. So the voice of the Syrian refugees became not only a humanitarian issue, and human rights are at the core of many of the things that we need to be discussing as justice, but the Syrian, the plight of the Syrian refugees, displaced people, became also a political tool that is being used internally, regionally, and internationally. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. The flight of many North Africans and Sub-Saharan Africans into Europe as climate.
Nadim, actually, we'll come back to that. I think we're going to discuss the issue of refugees and the issue of climate.
but that's also a voice that's being used,
right,
politically, and this is what I want to touch upon. Now, on an internal level, yes, there are a lot of members of parliament that decry the underprivileged case, that they're suffering because of poor policies, poor strategies, poor implementation of development, equitable development, etc. These are heard, whether through newspapers, social media, civil society, or even the normal parliamentary formal systems. But then there is that other side, that is the grayer side, where the politics come into play, and it ends up being something, a totally different ballgame. Over, back to you.
Right. Yeah, before we go to Eyad, I don't know, Sarah, we'll get back. I have a feeling we were hacked somehow. There's somebody who popped up in the audience at a very funny name, and he asked me a very strange question. He was asking whether, do I think women are supposed to be even represented? That person has now disappeared. I think that's probably the whole technical thing that from that interesting world we live in. Eyad, do you want to comment on that point?
Yes,
as well?
I'll give you about our situation in Palestine about this issue. The NGO, the environmental NGO, they have high voice about this issue. and they playing a good role in about the climate change and environmental issue as in general, especially as you know, Yaqob, in Palestine, we have the problem is in two ways. It is internally problem and it is occupational problem, because we don't have control in about 60% of our land, and it is under Israel's control. So you cannot make any activities for adaptation or any mitigation about the environmental issue, about the climate change, without Israel's army effects in this issue. So for this reason, you will find a lot of NGOs, especially environmental and law NGOs, working in climate justice to show how much the problem in Palestine, because we have pollution from the Israeli settlements and all these things. About the authority, environmental quality authority, they're working hard in the strategies and in the policies, and they sign on all the UN agreement about this issue. So we have the decision maker, they're willing to do something about this issue. The NGO, they're working very hard, because we have two problems internally and at the same time from the Israelis. And the main thing, until now, we try to let the education institutions like schools and this issue to have and understand what's about the climate change. So we have 3 pillars working in Palestine in this issue.
Thanks, Eyad. Just one more thing to push back on that. So you've all mentioned NGOs and civil society, and GLD is always interested in all things local. So there are cases in some countries, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, that, you know, again, the whole issue of representation, that, you know, NGOs working on this space tend to consider they, as we all know, NGO claims to speak for the voiceless. That's always the story. But there's kind of a growing concern that a lot of NGOs, which are heavily financed by donors, tend to concentrate their efforts mostly in urban areas. So this will be in capitals. This will be in Cairo, in Beirut, in Muscat. And then the much bigger subnational picture, or people at the peripheries, tend to be left out. Are these issues in any of these countries? I don't know if anybody has a thought, but it's just a bit of a pushback from me. There's nothing from Lebanon. You want to say something, Nadim?
Yeah. Look, the issue of NGOs is not that they concentrate their work in Beirut, for example. Lebanon is too small for such an issue to be, for such a thing to be an issue. It's the worst thing is about 2 hours drive, 3 hours drive to the most remote area. The issue with NGOs is, are they really representatives? Are they really passing on the dollar that they get onto the beneficiary, or are they retaining most of the money and just, you know, dripping in some of this to the beneficiaries? That's a major question to ask. And that goes to international NGOs, local NGOs, etc. And donor oversight oftentimes is laced with politics, and if not existent at times. So this is where that's another issue, but it is also accountability as part of justice. We need to hold everybody that's in the field accountable to what they're doing, be they governments or civil society. And that's part of where justice comes in and seeks in on the national scale, regional scale, or even international scale. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Nadim. Khalifa, I can see you want to say something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I can say in this point, most of the voice in our country to make the decision came from the government. Actually, the decision depends on some scientific research and study, and maybe some statistics data, but we need to take the local community opinion. I can see there is no voice for the local community. Like maybe the decision maker can do some survey, a questionnaire, or even interview for the local community. I believe that local community itself has some strategy, some way to deal with some weather event like floods or heavy rain or something like that. So maybe we can say before we make any decision, we have to get some or do some survey or questionnaire to get some opinion from the local community. Thank you.
If Dr. Mohamed, do you want to chip in as well?
Yeah, I think that the NGOs in Sudan, they did a lot of work. And of course, they are contributing very well in raising awareness about climate change, and they are contributed effectively in all effort to adapt and mitigate the climate impact. Of course, the issue, I am totally agree with Nadim that there is always need to a sort of accountability and in other words, transparency. In some cases that the NGOs, they try to integrate or try to accommodate the willing of international donors. So sometimes they make some modification for their original project that totally responds to the need of communities, but try to insert some issues that to satisfy the requirement of international donors. Somehow this make a sort of concentration of project and activities in certain area and ignoring or neglecting other areas. So by the way of another, they are doing well, but of course, as a human experience, they has some fault. Maybe they enforced by this according to term and reference for donors, and this needs some work from their side to be adopt some national NGOs strategy and plan to combat and to adapt to climate change. Thank you.
Not sure if Eyad, you want to contribute on that as well?
Yes, Yaqob. I think just brief, I will mention because my colleagues mention everything. I think the NGO, they have the main role in this issue, Yaqob. They can, the people, they feel their activities in the ground. You know, the government, they keep working in the policies and these issues, and they don't have anything in the ground as government. But who implement these strategies and policies? They are the NGOs. And I think that transparency and in NGOs is more than any governmental issues. So I speak in Palestine, we have many NGOs and they are very strong and they have a very strong relation with the international NGO, with the donors. So they get the money direct, the fund from the donors for all their project without government monitoring in this issue. So I think the NGO and the university, the research center, they are the main players in this regards for the climate justice.
Thank you. I think the reason I posed that question is I think there's a growing concern, like I said, about a lot of NGOs claiming to speak for the voiceless, and there's a lot of cases of elite capture in this space. Let's just move on. A question which Nadim touched before, the issue of special groups, as I've mentioned. You know, we're discussing the questions of equity, and as I've said, as we said in the introduction, that climate change affects people differently, and there are people who feel this impact more than others. So I was wondering if there are kind of, you know, special targeted programs in your respective countries, let's say targeting women specifically, or targeting refugees. And I'm sure that I saw, for instance, there's quite a lot of discussion on refugees from Syria in Lebanon. Nadim, you've mentioned about the story of climate migrants. It may not be an issue in the countries that are in the room today, but it's a big issue in the region. So if we can discuss those issues, but particularly first, if there are particular national programs or specific frameworks targeting these special minorities in your countries, and if there is none, it's okay. Who want to get the ball rolling? Nadim, you want to get, yeah.
Yeah, I'll go. Look, climate migrants per se do not exist worldwide. As you know, these are climate migrants. Nobody identifies people officially as climate migrants. They are often labeled as migrants for political expedience. They send them back to their countries of origin. So, and the tying of climate change, the linking of climate change to migration directly is oftentimes missing. So the offshoot of disputes and conflict over natural resources, for example, drying of soil, which leads to less pasture area, pushing pastoralists into farmers' lands, etc. This is an indirect link, maybe to a weather phenomenon rather than a climate change. So a lot of this now becomes a hedge, and which is most suitable for the countries that are involved in it and the communities that are involved in it. But nevertheless, there's a group of people worldwide, whether in Lebanon, in the West Asia or the North Africa region, that are suffering from degradation of land, environmental degradation of land, either due to a deteriorating environment because of overexploitation of resources or because of climate change. These people are suffering and nobody is compensating them for their losses. Sometimes there are factories that are coming up, sprouting up around built up areas that are spewing fumes into the atmosphere, forcing people, residential areas around these factories to up and leave. How do you define these people? Even though they can, you know, they either leave their homes or sell those homes for nothing, and they leave to another area. They are maybe internally displaced, or they were forced out because of environmental degradation. Similarly, climate is now slowly magnifying these aspects, these issues. And now it is acceptable, for example, to say there's an environmental concern. Now the next phase for us is to link this environmental degradation or deterioration to climate and then make that link. I didn't answer the question directly, but there are issues of concern, whether through formal channels or informal channels directed towards getting these people's rights or exercising appropriate justice or in this realm. Over.
Thanks, Nadim. Before you, just because reading your memo from Lebanon was quite interesting. There's got a story there about Syrian refugees coming to Lebanon and how they have kind of, you know, started a whole new conversations around equity and justice issues. If you could say that briefly before I move to the rest.
That's a very touchy issue. I was involved in a workshop last Monday, the day before yesterday, where there was a filmmaker showing two families, Syrian families, who've left northern Syria, northeastern Syria, and migrated to Lebanon way after ISIS had taken hold over that area and whatever had happened. So they went through all of the war and then they came over to Lebanon. Once that Turkey turned off the tap and stopped water flowing into their areas, and these people came to Lebanon and started farming. At the same time, a study I had done showed that people in farming areas who have used Syrian farmers as laborers to support them are now becoming anxious about their presence in Lebanon because they are competing for jobs, or they're competing for meager resources that are now less and less available, commodities that are less available because of our own economic crisis. So now the Syrians are the Syrian displaced people who are now in Lebanon because of no problem of their own. You know, they are there, but they are now a burden on communities that they live in. And there is growing conflict between these, and we have less water available because we have less electricity. So there is competition for water, and this is also raising the stakes between communities. So these are issues that we need to look into in terms of basically human right. You know, the rights of the refugees to live in dignity, and also the rights of the host communities to maintain their livelihood and a dignified existence. So there is this multifaceted problem. Many are calling it the poly crisis, and it is something that really needs to be more addressed in a human rights approach, where environmental and climate justice works. And I think this is a good starting point for us. Thanks.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And, you know, a story where host communities are feeling the brunt of the arrivals from Syria. Let's go to Oman, Khalifa. Reading your memo is quite interesting. You know, you seems to argue that, you know, in Lebanon, it appears all groups are fairly represented. I think you're painting a very, I would say, rosy picture, and I'll be interested, how did Lebanon achieve all of this? I mean, looks like a very successful case study in so many ways.
Actually, we have no such of this case in Oman, but I can say in this point, we have to take care about the refugees. Even these people move or migrate because of the climate change, when they suffer from the climate change, or even they move because of the politics stuff, and then they suffering from the weather, like cold weathers or hot weather. So I can say in these things, yes, we have to take care about them. But maybe in Lebanon and Palestine, they have more clear about this kind of issues.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mohamed, do you want to go next?
Yes, I think that in the case in Sudan, of course, we are suffering from the extreme climatic event, especially the flooding during the rainy season and drought during the dry period. So as a result, there will be a very huge internal displacement. And as a result, for that, government, regional, and NGO support always is going there and expected. And of course, they are within the targeted group, within this affected communities. They are thinking of gender issue, especially the women, the eldest, the youth, and normally they put some concern about that. So this situation make a huge burden on the, especially on the urban areas, because most of the people, when they are suffering, they displace into the near areas to the cities and towns. So they create a very pressing condition on the facilities of the societies, the urban societies. Also, I think that in the project, especially as I mentioned, nowadays to apply for fund especially Adaptation Fund or GEF or GCF. By way or another, you have to take care of the gender issue and also the community participation. So by way of another, most of the governmental and NGOs projects, they are trying to accommodate issues and support related to gender and the most affected groups of women and elders and youth. Thank you.
Eyad, over to you now.
Jacob, about these things, I want to tell you about our case. We have most of the farmers, they left. Do you hear me?
I can very well, yes.
Yes. Most of our farmers, they left their land and they went to work inside Israel. Why? Because, you know, there is no water for agriculture from the climate change, the temperature, and we don't have the infrastructure for the agriculture, for export and import and all these issues. For this reason, we face a big problem now. Most of the farmers, they left their land as immigration, as if you like to mention, or something like that, and they working inside Israel because the agriculture, it is not benefit, it is not feasible for them to work in their land because at the end of the day, they don't have enough money from the agriculture because the water is very high and it is not available in the same time from the climate change. For this reason, we have this big problem about climate change and immigration and these things.
All right. Thanks very much. I mean, I get the feel that, you know, we're discussing issues that are kind of overlapping between, you know, the issues of equity and justice and the broader issues of politics and political economy of climate change. And maybe we need a whole different panel on the politics and the political economy of it. We'll discuss that with Gadia and the rest of the team, whether that will be the theme for the last roundtable at the end of the month. I've pushed you back, but so we know that this year, later this year, there's going to be the, you know, COP27 conference of parties, which is this, you know, international conference which has got this broader international mandate to kind of, you know, set the target for the globe, and I think it's happening in Egypt, as I've said. The next one is happening in UAE, United Arab Emirates, next year. This is just a provocative question from me as we're wrapping up. If you're a delegate, I don't know how many of you are going, but if you asked what is needed to create a fair and equitable world in the theme of climate change, I don't know what will be the message from some of you from your respective countries. Again, if it's okay if you have nothing to say.
The problem is we have a lot to say.
Okay, a lot to say. That's good, and we have some time. So let's start with Oman.
Yes, maybe I can take care about the rise awareness. I think we can talk a lot about a lot of issues, but I think the most important things to raise the awareness. The people have to know how can deal with this kind of issues. When people have experience and have information, how can I deal with the climate change? I think things it will be better than. Yeah, we need to discuss. We need to do some research and study, but the people have to know how can deal with this kind of issue. So I think from myself, I will concentrate on the rise awareness.
Okay, thanks. But before we go to the next, I would remind the few people who have in the audience, if you also have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm not inviting hackers like the one we had a few minutes ago. Let's go to Nadim.
Okay. What would I say for a more equitable world? I would, a lot of the politics was being played and is still being played in the negotiations are centered between, the tug of war between China and the US and the West on one side, and those that are around the clusters, the two major clusters, with the poor countries, maybe the 100 other countries in the world or 120 other countries stuck in the middle. I would want to start with just like the world expected and accepted an apology from Germany about the Holocaust. This is much worse. This is on a grander scale. So I would expect an apology. First, I would start with asking the industrialized countries to apologize for what has happened. That's number one for me. And then based on that apology, we would start building a fair, supportive community rather than politics-based approach where politics guides climate action support. We don't want political strings attached to any support to any of the countries. The support should go directly without any financial or great financial load, and then allow the beneficiaries to benefit and to grow in that sense. This is the right process, and then everybody can work in a mutually supportive manner. This is utopia. It's not going to happen. It's also nice to throw it out there. Maybe one of these days somebody would hook it in. I'll turn it back over to you, Thabit. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. It may sound a bit very rhetorical and very utopian in many ways, but it's still worth discussing, I think. Do we go to Sudan next?
Yes, of course, I think that if I will be the COP, that there is actual need for reviewing of finance mechanism for Paris Agreement, for instance. It's still that there is always talk about funds, especially the adaptation fund, but what was really received by adaptation fund is always less than was announced in the media. So it's still this the fund for adaptation, which is actually is expected to be directed to developing countries, is very weak in comparison with funds that allocated for mitigation. So the finance mechanism is a big issue that should be discussed with some transparency, and also with some sort of thinking about we can say about the models and the tools for financing, because for instance, GEF and GCF as a bank for the fund for climate change and environment, the procedure and the application procedure is very complicated, and even it is need the fund to do it. So you can imagine, even to find the fund, you have to find the fund for the application itself. So the procedure is very complicated, and even it make it very difficult for some countries to have a fund for their countries to increase their adaptation. Of course, also one of issues that in the Paris Agreement is that related to the education and race awareness. Actually, there is no fund for research, and especially for developing countries. As my colleague Eyad said, there is no real figure that come from the countries itself. In most of the work of climate change, For instance, for greenhouse inventory. In most of our countries, they use the default values that provided by IPCC. And when you come to speak about development, how to develop without research, and this really fund for research is the weakest point in the system of UNFCCC and IPCC. And of course, because we always talk about compensation or a way of compensation or a way of support, actually I will talk a lot about bilateral and international cooperation. So that this is the hot issue to be discussed in the COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. Dr. Eyad, you want to supplement as well?
Yes, Yaqob. From my opinion, I think we cannot do anything without there is no willing from the decision maker in the ground. So from my work in the field, I found there is nothing in our strategies and policies about climate change. And the decision maker, they think the climate change is funny thing, and they not take this in serious issue. So from my opinion, before that, I give you example. I asked some student to have thesis about climate change and the smart technology in water, in Palestinian Water Authority and their strategy. We not found anything in our strategy, just one statement. And I think all the ministries, they use one statement in their policies just for the donors and the international to tell them, yes, we're talking about climate change. You understand me, Yaqob? So I think we should work in these people, in the decision maker people, to understand it is a serious problem. It is not just we talking like the developed country. It is a problem here in each country. And I think last week we see how much the problem in the temperature. So if I want to talk or to do something in this issue, we should working in this side of the people, the decision maker. How we can convince them to take it seriously inside the strategy and policy. After that, we can convince the donors and all the international. We are interested in this issue.
Thanks, Eyad. Yeah, so decision makers have to appreciate the seriousness of the climate crisis. I think Dr. Mohamed has talked about the need for research and funding. You know, the fact that, you know, a lot of countries are still relying on IPCC, greenhouse gases inventory, for instance, it shows we have a long way to go. Very provocative, and I totally agree, statement about, you know, apology to environmental or climate crimes, as Nadim was putting it. And the need to raise awareness. I think we can all agree that I think we have a long way to build an equitable and fair and climate resilient society. There's quite a long way, but this has been quite a very interesting panel. And on this note, we come into the end of the panel. As I've said, we have our last final panel, Gadia, at the 29th of September. I think we have finalized the themes. We'll be getting back to you on that, and everything will be posted soon. I think we'll have to negotiate the Agadia, because I have a feeling the issue of politics and then the broader political economy of climate change maybe needs a slot in somewhere. We'll see how we can factor that in. But I really thank you again for joining us today. Sorry for the technical glitches previously. And hope to see you in a couple of weeks.
But can I just add one point, Yaqob?
Sure.
Please, I want to stress and focus in Dr. Mohamed what mentioned about research in the climate change. We don't have anything in our area, nothing. Everyone talking about the climate change, but when we're working to see what's happened and figures and statistical, you will not find anything. Please take this in your consideration.
Research and funding, right? That's, I think, it's been well noted. And as we have done in the first roundtable, you know, we'll be preparing a policy brief capturing all these key messages, and we'll send it to you So a lot of these messages will be captured for sure. Thanks a lot once again. If before you go, I mean, there are a couple of things on the chat here, so stay on. There are two questions. We have got a question from Tamar Al-Shayal. Is basically saying, I was wondering if any of the panelists want to reflect on the urban-rural dimension of climate justice. I mean, to which degree this special distinction shapes national climate action in terms of recognition, participation, and public investment. So the urban-rural dimension of climate justice, if anybody wants to say something on that. And then we have another question from our colleague here, Jeff Parler, who is asking, what would a framework for climate reparations look like? Who is responsible? Who will be the beneficiary? Who will the beneficiaries be? If any of you want to react with those,
yeah, I'd love to react.
Sure.
Let's go with question one. The rural-urban divide is always manifested by who is politically stronger, and that's country dependent. In countries where the rural regions contribute most, agriculture contributes most to the GDP of a country, they are the more powerful, or the landowners are the more powerful, so they dictate where the investment goes. In most countries, the urban areas get most of the investment in urban infrastructure, and very little goes into rural areas. And the level of centralization and the presence of power in urban areas has caused a lot of the peripheries, as we call them, to become less and less serviced by the government. So this is also reflected in the justice issue, where the flash floods that occur or droughts that occur just go unnoticed. That's for question one. For question two, regarding the
climate reparations.
Exactly. What would the reparations look like? This is what the serious negotiations should go into, not haggling over a comma or a word, the meaning of a word at the COP. What the reparations should look into, maybe basically the island states that are disappearing. How would we help them? I don't know. Recover. Those smaller countries with the least contribution to climate change and with the most, who are most at risk, how can these countries be provided with support to adapt and to work through the risks that they are facing and build up their resilience and reduce their vulnerabilities? Who is responsible? The industrialized world is responsible directly, readily. I say this without any qualification. They have been spewing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since the 1850s. So that's where we start. Who would be the beneficiaries? I answered that. And one more thing regarding to Eyad, there is a lot of data on the region available. If you look at what ESCWA is doing, especially RICAR, RICCAR, they have data on the region, they have modeled the region. We can look at climate projections for the region. In Lebanon and some of the other countries, we know that we do produce reports on emissions and where they come from and how much they are. So I'm pretty certain there are other countries that do the same. So maybe that can be a source of support for your work. And then I turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadim. And if anybody else wants to pick up on some of the questions as well, you're more than welcome. Who is going next? Dr. Mohamed, I can see. No?
Actually, I agree with Nadim that the urban areas, they are suffered from climate change as a result of displacement of rural areas. Of course, both rural and urban, they are suffering, but you know that always the human being looking, or the people looking for area where they can find safety and find the basic needs of water and so on. So of course, the climate change impact on urban areas is more catastrophic and more high, but of course, as a result of their immigration to the urban areas, they pressed the situation in the urban areas, especially the cities in the region. In general, they are very old and their facilities, they are confined to certain numbers. So the sudden increase of displaced people, this condition will, of course, will make a pressure on the city itself. Somehow I try also that with research. Of course, there is some scatter studies, but there is no concrete studies in climate in the region. And even now, I contribute in the third national communication of the Sudan. And in most of the work, they always they said we use the default values, for example, for greenhouse emission calculation. So still there is a need for research, and in terms of technical and in terms of also some socio-economic studies to integrate the local community perspective of climate change and the impact of climate change on their societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. If you want to add anything, it's okay. If not, we can wrap up. I can see there's nothing from Khalifa and Eyad. Again, thanks a lot for quite a very productive discussion. Thanks to our few but very active participants as well. As I said, we'll get back to you. Gadia will be reaching out to you with details about the final roundtable at the end of the month. And we hope to see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.